Thank you for coming to this talk about distributed security ownership. My name's Paul Hawkins. I'm a principal in the Office of the CISO in AWS Security. And later you'll be hearing from Amy, who's the Director of Security Engineering at MongoDB. In this session, you hear about how AWS and also MongoDB have approached scaling Security Guardians and Security Champions program. What are the problems we're trying to solve here? How have we approached it? And how do we measure the effectiveness? I'd like to start with this quote. This is a quote from C.J. Moses, CISO of AWS. Service teams own the security of their service. AWS security owns the security of AWS. And what I take this to mean is the people who build and run the systems are responsible for the security of the things that they build. But the overall security organization is responsible for building the tools, techniques, mechanisms, and processes that help them do that. We're there to enable people to make good decisions. And then at the end of the process, when they go through a security review, we help test that they've met the security bar. This is also good when you think about the overall job of security. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. It doesn't exist in isolation. You're there to empower the overall business. You're there to help people ship securely. So what do we see from modern security leaders? What are the kind of things that we hear from customers? And what are the kind of things that we see as people grow and run their security program? The first thing is that the security function is there to help increase business value. They work with the builder teams, they work with the service teams who build the systems. And they're not just there to protect value, though that is part of the role. They're also there to help increase business value. And one of the ways they do that is by helping people ship more quickly. The role of the security function still includes protecting the entire organization and running edge protection, doing security reviews, running the security operations process, and doing threat intelligence, but it also has a role to educate the entire organization. Security is everyone's job, not just the job of people with security in their job title. So that education component and scaling security is really, really important. And another thing we see from security leaders is the concept of giving back time to builders, making it easier for them to spend more of the time on their job and less of the time doing additional things that they weren't expecting to do. So what do we mean when we say give back time to builders? In AWS Security, we work closely with our service teams. We work closely with the people who build the systems that you use to build awesome things for your customers. When we have a need to ask a builder team to do something, we want to make it easier for them to understand what the ask is. So we want to automate discovery. We want to build tools and systems that make it easier for them to know what they want to do during the build phase. You can use this in services like Code Whisperer and Inspector for Lambda code when you're building on AWS. These tools and these automations make it easier to know when you're in the headspace of building something that you've got something to do. You need to address an issue. You need to change your code. From a security organization perspective, we want to be specific when we ask teams to take an action. It's much better to say, hey, you need to update this package in this particular code repository or this particular part of your application than saying, a CVE has landed, you need to go and figure out whereabouts you're going to be impacted by that. So being really specific when we ask builder teams to do something. And also give them guidance around knowing when they're done. So let's take a step back. Let's think about the problem that we're trying to solve here. We're all trying to build systems. We're trying to protect our data. You may be in a builder role. You may be in a service team. You may be in a security organization. You may be in an assurance function. We're trying to build systems that can delight our customers. We're trying to get things into the production as quickly and safely as possible. But we also want to make sure that we're protecting our data. We want to make sure that we know where our data is. We want to make sure that the appropriate controls are deployed to mitigate any risks that apply to that system that we're building. As a security function and as a builder team, we want to identify issues early, because as we know, it's way cheaper and easier to fix something in dev than it is to fix something later in the software development lifecycle. I mean, we're all working together to try and delight customers, so we're all in this together and we're all trying to solve the same problem. And I think the best way of describing that problem is distributed security ownership. Security, as I said, is everyone's responsibility. It's just that people with security in their job title do that as their primary function and enable the rest of the business. Getting people into a state where they're making early decisions is great. This means that they've got enough runway to fix stuff. If I come to you as a builder and say, here is some requirements that I've got for the security bar that you need to meet, and you're still in the sprint planning phase, you're still in development, that gives you time to figure out when to do that makes sense for you. That's a lot better than me turning at the end of the project or at the end of the process and saying, oh, by the way, you have to do these additional things. We're all trying to delight customers. We can't delight customers if we don't get features in their hands so they can use them. But equally, we can't delight customers if we don't meet the security bar. So we're trying to solve the same problem, just from different angles. And then we want to drive the culture of ownership. We want to make sure that service teams own the security of the systems they build. And we want to make that easier by building tooling and automation, which allows them to reason about the properties without ever having to talk to a security person. And then when they get to the security review, they've done a lot of the work up front, and they're not only finding things out at the end. So in AWS, we have the same challenges. We had to address the human scaling challenge as a particular example. We were observing that the builder teams, the numbers of builders in our teams, was growing way more quickly than the number of application security humans that we had. And as we build and release services, everything has to go through a security review. Application security in AWS is the team that holds the security bar. This is the team that makes sure that we're building things in a way that enables us to delight our customers and for our services to operate safely. However, we found out that as the number of builder teams was growing and as we were getting more security reviews, we were blocking on the human process. This became particularly challenging. So what we did, and this actually came out of application security engineers looking to try and solve the problem, we started training up builders and service teams on how to think about security. We started off by giving them guidance around what does threat modeling look like and what are the kind of things that you need to look for. And we embedded that knowledge in the builder teams. This meant that as the number of builders in our environment grew and the number of AppSec folks in our environment grew slower, we were able to move more quickly. We were able to make those good decisions earlier by embedding people who are essentially a proxy for the security function in the builder teams. One of the reasons this was really valuable is that those builders are way closer to the problem that they're trying to solve. If they're in a particular service team, their focus is figuring out how to ship features that address the particular problem of the service. So they have the deep technical knowledge, and then empowering them to understand what they need to consider from a security perspective allowed them to make good decisions way earlier in the process. This had some benefits. This allowed us to reduce the time through the security review. Remember when I said we're trying to give time back for builders? This is one of the key outcomes. Being quicker through the security review while maintaining the security bar was extremely valuable. One of the reasons is that we reduced the amount of findings that we discovered only at the security review stage by over 20%. So reduced time and findings is ultimately better for the business, which is where we come back to enabling business value. We're a security function, and we are helping the business achieve their goals more quickly. We call this the AWS Guardians program. Some people call their programs champions, some people have advocates. You can call it what you like, but call it something that resonates with the people in your organization. There are several ways to approach this, and as you'll hear from Amy much later, different approaches are all valid, but the key point here is that having something that's got a brand, having something that's got support, and having something that is trying to solve the distributed ownership problem. So what is an AWS Guardian? They're trained, security-minded Amazonians who volunteer to be a consistent champion for security on their team. And the volunteer aspect is really important. We want people who are really keen on leaning into the security challenge, people who've got an interest in the domain, people who want to do this work. It's possible that you could mandate that people have to join a program, but it's definitely much better if you have people who volunteer for these things. So they work in their service team, partnering with their fellow builders. They make informed security decisions earlier on in the process. They know what it takes to navigate the security process. They know the things that they're going to get measured on, and it allows them to plan in early on in their day-to-day operations so they can prioritize the work. And they do serve as an extension to the AppSec function. They scale security awareness. They provide a strong feedback mechanism back into us in the security organization as well. We currently have over 2,000 builders trained as Guardians, and the community does provide good learning experiences between Guardians. So we have more experienced Guardians and newer Guardians that are in a common Slack channel. They can ask each other questions. And that's a good ad hoc education mechanism to help people understand more about the work that they need to do. So how do we find these folks? How do we ramp them up? What does it look like to onboard somebody as a Guardian? Well, we start off with volunteers. We want people to really lean into this. We ramp them up in a series of cohorts. We start off with training. Training is extremely important for us here. We start them off with the threat modeling the right way for builders course. This allows them to think about, in a very structural way, how to reason about the security properties of the system, to identify the threats and come up with appropriate mitigations that are linked to the baseline security controls and the security guidance that we have from AWS Security. We want to grow the community. We want to make sure that we've got Guardians across multiple different types of service teams. We want to make sure that people in different domains have people that they can work with, so we want to get multiple Guardians across different parts of the business. We're aiming for one Guardian in every 2 pizza team. But we also want to make sure that we're giving appropriate feedback to the Guardians. We want to have metrics that allow us to understand, are they working effectively? Is there the right focus, the right tools and automation? Are we giving them the right education? Are there things that we need to do to make sure that they're set up for success and they're helping their service teams operate effectively? So the community aspect of this is definitely not to be underrated. The fact that they're all in the common Slack channel, the fact that they're working across different lines of business and different services allows them to get that feedback and allows that to get that mentoring. So we've got our Guardians, we've recruited them, they've volunteered, we've trained them up, they've gone through the threat modeling training, they've gone through the cohort-based learning, they're now a Guardian. How do they work with the security review process? How do they fit into our overall way of getting from dev and shipping services? So this is a relatively typical and somewhat simplified SDLC. Design, develop, test, ship. More complexity is available, but for the purposes of this is our very linear process of going from a design to actually getting something into production. So we have AWS Security at the top, who are responsible for the security review, own the building of automated testing, finalizing security reviews. And then the service team with the Guardian embedded starts the threat model at the design phase. And the threat model is a living document throughout the life of the service. As they iterate more features, the threat model may evolve and pivot. They want to keep evaluating the properties of the system that they're building. So as they go through the development phase and are actually starting to build things, you may tweak the threat model a little bit as you find out more about actual implementation. But they're building mitigations for these identified threats. They're remediating issues during the security review, some of which they may have already identified, and they're working with the AppSec engineer to identify appropriate mitigations. But they do work closely with AppSec during the security review. And then the Guardian, in conjunction with the service team, supports the final security review. That allows them to validate that they've met the security bar and are in a position to release the feature or the service. But there is obviously a lot more iteration in this flow. This very linear approach to, we'll come up with a design, we'll do a bunch of development, we'll run through test, immediately ship. Has anyone had that when they've built any software? Just worked completely the right time, first time, the right time? I know the code that I wrote needs a lot of iteration. So the iteration helps with the feedback. So the Guardian starts the threat model, and there's an iteration around the design. As the design becomes more articulated, that helps them to capture the potential threats, identify the right mitigations, and then balance that against the efficiency of designing, building, and running the service. It may be that it informs their architecture. They may need to do some tweaks, but having that security mindset from the start allows them to build it into the way that the application or service is designed. Then as they go through development and they actually write the code and they assemble the components, validating how that works based on their expectations may result in some tweaks to the threat model, may result in some different feedbacks. They can test now, is this the most efficient way of achieving an outcome? How does this impact my ability to operate the service? And the same feedback loop around the security review, doing the pen test, identifying issues, remediating the issues. This is a cyclical approach as well. This is the way that we can make sure that small chunks of work can build up to deliver a good quality outcome. And then going through the final security reviews, making sure that we've met the security bar, and then off into production. But then this flow continues. So once you've launched a service, once you've got something that's actually shipped into production, you can start working on new features. As you build the new features, is there a new API or is there a new capability? You expand on your threat model, you expand on your design, you keep working again, and you iterate through. And this is how we drive that continuous improvement. And this also has a benefit for the Guardians themselves. They know that they're getting more institutional memory. But one of the important capabilities, or one of the important parts of the Guardians program itself is the metrics. In the beginning, we had to demonstrate that this program was useful, that this approach was useful. So in 2021, 22, the metrics were very much 22.5% fewer medium and high findings that were only identified at a security review stage. Over 25% quicker through the security review, which resulted in us saving over 200,000 human days across all of the services in a year. This was really good data to get leadership support to say, this is a program that we want to invest in. This is something that we need to have a team that's going to run. This was look how useful it is to do this. And I think this is one of the genuine value propositions of distributed security ownership. Having people make good decisions earlier on in the software development lifecycle allows you to fix things earlier and cheaper, but it also increases the velocity of getting things into production. But we've evolved this program. This program now has a program manager and a team that run it. So the metrics are a lot more about calibrating the Guardians and is the program operating efficiently. So Guardians get feedback as they go through the security review. So the AppSec engineer at the end will provide them with feedback through a feedback form. And we also have Guardians providing feedback on the AppSec process. But this allows us to train in an ongoing fashion the Guardians. Are the threat models accurate? If there needs to be additional guidance from an AppSec engineer to a Guardian, they can provide specific examples. Now, this is what a good threat model looks like. It's part of the onboarding. One of the things after we've taught them about threat modeling is a session on what does a good threat model look like. But when the Guardian is working with a particular service, having that feedback to say, yes, you hit the right level. Oh, here are some additional mitigations you could have considered, or did you consider these threats, or you've actually been overly detailed. You need to hit the right level for the threat model. And then we can use this metric to track the improvement of Guardians over time. We can use this to figure out, do we need to provide better training up front to Guardians? Do we need to do a revalidation process? When we look at our Guardians community, is there knowledge sharing that we can do? Is there additional education? Is there additional guidance that we can provide to them? We can also look at the comparisons between teams. And the goal for this is to find teams that are doing things well and see if we can amplify them. Are there behaviors or are there particular things that particular teams are doing that we want to say, yeah, we'll take that and we'll cascade that across the wider Guardians community? We also measure how long engagements take by team. This allows us to measure, are we still accelerating the business? Is there additional things that we need to build? We do track engagements that are not supported by a Guardian, but some teams have dedicated security engineers, so they don't really need a Guardian because they've got someone whose full-time job is security as part of that team. But we do want to track the engagements that are not supported so we can prioritize some recruitment and make sure that we're working with all of the appropriate teams to get people interested and aware of the program. Also, these metrics help us identify common issues. So we can look at the top findings by source or volume or the number of findings per review. And this is one of the important pieces of information that helps us prioritize the what to automate next part of the security program. If we're seeing an increased number of findings in a particular area, if there's a particular thing that multiple service teams are struggling with, this is an ideal candidate for both improved guidance, but also improved automation. Any time that we can identify programmatically that a team has an issue or a team needs to do some work without them having to talk to a security engineer, that's incredibly valuable. So these metrics help us prioritize the what to automate next question. So we had some unexpected outcomes. There was the expected benefits of the program that I've described. It's quicker through the security review process. It allows us to identify findings earlier. It reduces the amount of rework from teams. We build up the institutional memory. We build up security knowledge across a wider part of the organization. But the other thing we found is that having these 2,500 Guardians across multiple different service teams gave us a distributed signal. It's a really good way of getting anecdotal feedback to support or maybe even disprove some of our metrics. This distributed signal in the form of feedback helps us to tweak our AppSec process in its entirety. If Guardians are telling us that as they go through the process, something is not clear or guidance needs to be improved, we can take that feedback and we can put it back into our process and we can tweak and improve as we go along. I mentioned prioritizing what to automate next, but that also means that when we're talking about deploying a new automation, we can use the Guardians as an outbound communication mechanism. If we want to run a campaign, if we want to ask multiple service teams to do a piece of work, it's a lot easier to work with the couple of thousand folks who we have a good, close relationship with, who can then cascade it out to their service teams as a proxy for the security function than just emailing every single builder. This helps us to make sure that the guidance that we're providing on the requirements that we're adding as we kind of ratchet up the security bar are provided in a way that is meaningful and easily consumable by builders. And also, from a broader perspective, we've now got people who have been exposed to security, who are working in security, and potentially that's expanding our hiring pool. Folks mentioned that hiring security engineers is challenging. This allows us to have people who are already in our organization, already bought into the culture, already understand how things work, who've now got a bit of security knowledge that we can then potentially, if they choose, consider for security roles. Not everyone who's going to be a Guardian is going to end up in a security engineer role, but having people who've got more exposure to the security domain is always a good thing. But what about other approaches? I've talked about the AWS Guardians program and how we think about distributed security ownership. So now I'd like to get Amy on stage and talk about how MongoDB think about this problem.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy, Director of Security Engineering at MongoDB. And today I'm going to talk to you about how we do more with less with our MongoDB Security Champion program. So why did we do this? As the company was growing, we needed to find a way to help scale our security team. And so what we did here is we created our champion program. And our champions are across all different business units. And there are eyes and ears in terms of what's going on, how things are working, and how to influence security within their business unit. Also, our security champion program helps us mature our overall security program. They give us tons of feedback on everything, but really, really in a way that we can rapidly adjust and adapt our programs. As Paul mentioned earlier, this is also really great for our talent pipeline. So we've had multiple security champions that have become full-time security team members. And because they come from such different backgrounds and perspectives, it's been really, really helpful, especially in security. So when we were designing the security champion program, we needed to think about, like, how do we really want to design this? What is the right learning environment? How do we do this? And so we took two different theories here. And specifically, you hear about security champions, and a lot of times they're engaged, they're fun at first, right? People are super engaged, but what happens over time? Like, how do you sustain that engagement? And so what we did here is we looked at adult learning theory, and two elements here, you want to make it fun, but the other aspect too is you want to make it a really safe environment. Just like children, we need to make sure that adults also feel comfortable. And so we really made sure to have inclusive language and made sure that there's no shame, no blame. So any ideas that come out of here, anyone could raise any question and ask anything, and there'll be no shame. And creating that sense of trust is really fundamental. On the other end, in terms of motivation, we think about intrinsic motivation and how do you increase the motivation to make this sustainable. And so when we're looking at that, we looked at the effects of choice. If you give people options of what to learn and what they, specifically for me, if I have a choice, I'm more likely to pick and more likely to retain that information. And so what we did here is in our design of our program, we created these informal events that are much more tailored to various different perspectives and backgrounds so that people have a choice of event to attend. So we've got 4 key components here: membership, which we'll go more into shortly. We have one formal quarterly meeting. This is where we go over our roadmap with our champions. We go over what's happening. We do a lot of piloting and asking them for feedback. And then because our champions are from all different business units and have varied levels of experience with security, we create these much more specific informal events. And then, such as everyone else gets excited, right? ChatGPT or generative AI, when that comes out, we'll just create a quick informal event where we discuss it. The other big aspect here is ongoing communication, and so our Slack channel is super important, and this is where our champions are always engaging, and our security engineers and our InfoSec team at large is engaging with them. And we're constantly monitoring that to make sure that we're providing them interesting and useful information. We talked a little bit about effects of choice. Here's an example. So you have the formal meeting, and then we've got these informal. A lot of the informal are also our feedback, so we'll be testing everything with our champions. A key component here is when we're setting up our champions and for membership, we make sure that our members have asked their supervisor ahead of time. We get this done early. They know the time commitment, they get the supervisor permission before they get started. We think this is really important to make a successful program here. On the other end, it also helps us because it helps the manager understand how to utilize their employee to gain security knowledge. So who are our champions? So our champions are come from very different backgrounds. Some are technical, some are non-technical. So we have developers, we have people from DevOps, we've got sales, we've got marketers, we have executive assistants. And so for us, it's really important that we have this wide variety of security champions across all business units. The one thing that is a commonality here is that they all have a passion for security, and that is something that's really important to us. So one of our champions is here today, Comey. So she's one of our executive assistants, and she's the security champion for the EAs. And what's important here is that she'll take the information shared at the champions and share that back with her business unit with all the EAs. And especially if you think about EAs, there's so much the proximity to power and how close they are to a lot of confidential information. So making sure that they're secure and they understand security is very important here. Also, one example here is when we were doing password managers, we tested them out with our champions. We made sure we took their feedback, and then what we did is we took that, we iterated on it, came back, and as we were going to deploy the password managers, we had our champions meet again, and then what would happen and what Comey did is she then would set up her own meeting with the EAs to teach them how to use it, how it works, and I think even more importantly, why it matters. And so, this really helps our team scale because the first level of questions will go to Comey, and so it's also easier to hear from your own colleague. You're more comfortable to ask questions. So our champions are global; they're from around the world, and it's great that we have cultural different perspectives, but it's also important as we're able to how local governments respond to different cyber threats, and so we'll continue to expand the globalness of our program. So what are the type of events we do? So here, here's an example. One of our team members, Felix, does a great job of making these events not just generic, but really fun. And you can see that it's a spectrum, right? We'll do personal security, we'll do video game security, we'll do security in LinkedIn, we'll do book clubs. And then what we also do here is we send our champions to conferences. So like we have Comey here today. We've sent two of our champions to DevCon last year. They came back, presented on it, And then talk about our talent pipeline, we actually converted one of our champions into a full-time security team member. So it's a really great use of our resources. Also, our champions created their own Capture the Flag team, and I think it's pretty fun. They came in first place in the Booz Allen CTF. And again, this is a volunteer program. They're doing this outside of just their regular work here. And so, yeah. So promoting the program. So we have a wiki page. I'm sure you hear a lot about that. Everyone has a resource page. We spotlight our champion. We have a newsletter. But what's more important, I think, is getting buy-in from executives in the beginning. So our CISO, Lena, got buy-in from our board early on and got the green light on it. And our board was really supportive and really, really happy that we're doing this. And then again, our CEO was very happy about this, but also helped promote this for us. So when we launched it, he was the one in our company all hands promoting it. So I think getting the executive buy-in before you start is very important. Swag, everyone loves swag. It's something just not to forget about. I am wearing some swag. I think Comey has some swag. But I think just, don't forget about it. And it also touches the point of there is an area of marketing and branding your program. One of the biggest areas that we utilize our champions is for feedback. And so our champions, this is something we're constantly doing with our champions. We'll tap them for feedback all the time. May it be something as simple as a name for a Slack bot. May it also be around, help on assistance on investigation. So we're always asking our champions for feedback. They'll provide input on everything. They'll provide a lot of input, which is good. We like that, and we know that it will make the outcome much better. So they'll test all of our. They'll always be our beta testers. They'll always be. Anytime we do a policy change, we're meeting with them, getting their input and their feedback. And this can also be our comms. We want to make sure we're fostering a positive security culture. And so we're always making sure, are we coming across well, getting that feedback. And then phishing simulations, they always like to come up with ways to make it harder, but that work for our culture. And I think that's really important. It's about what culture your company is in and what culture fits for you. And so I think that's why, that feedback loop is so valuable. And while the champions have a voice at the table, they end up helping make the outcome much better, and they're also help distribute that knowledge within their team and become that first line of questions for the team when things come up. One of the things that we do is we really look at behavior change and really creating a positive security culture. And so while this isn't exactly related to security champions, it is the concept of the items that we're producing and that we're testing with our champions. This is the behavior model that we're thinking about and that we're using. We want to make sure our nudges are actually effective. So challenges. We face lots of challenges. I would say that we first started, if it doesn't work the first time, try again. We launched this, COVID hit, we took a pause. And that was okay. We relaunched it and it worked really well. We redesigned it. And so I think it's important that just because you've tried it once and it didn't work for you, try it again. We did have to say, it's a good problem to have, right? But we did have to say no to certain folks in order so that we can have diverse coverage across the company. And so that's one thing, for us, it's really important that we have one person in different business units. And this also allows our champions, it makes it a little bit exclusive, and that helps also with the program in terms of not everyone gets to be a champion. It's really special to be a champion too. And then content, I was hearing about this yesterday. I think Kristen was talking about it in another talk, but creating fresh content is hard, and it's a lot of work, but it's very, very important that you do so, and we put the resources behind it. And so we are always looking at the Slack channels, always looking to make sure that we understand what the content that champions want, and that we're always engaging with them. And so a lot of times we'll think what content would be cool, and they might not like it. So again, just making sure you're actually surveying them and making sure we're truly delivering on the needs of the champions. And then communication, when we have this when we first started, we had a lot of champions, and our InfoSec team, it was new for them to know what our champion program is and see the value. And just, there were some questions that would go unanswered. And so what we think is really important here is that sometimes some questions went unaddressed. And so over time, really, really thankful now, our entire InfoSec team really sees the value, and the whole company does, of how our champions have really helped and helped them. Like anytime they test something out with the champion, they know that the outcome of their project is gonna be vastly better. And so I'm really thankful now, and it helps our team scale, is that our entire InfoSec team is constantly engaging with our champions. So there'll always be an answer. Anytime a champion asks a question, there'll always be a response right away. And if we don't know, there'll always be the right subject matter expert that comes in. So there creates a sense of trust, and this creates and fosters a much more positive relationship between security and the rest of the company as well. So some of our takeaways here is, for us, this is a voluntary program, so anyone can join. And again, we believe that membership is really, we need supervisor permission. It's super important. And again, getting that executive buy-in is valuable. And then again, our champions are really, really good beta testers. And so anytime we have new ideas, they're always testing it for us or letting us know of any potential new vulnerabilities. And it's really great talent for our talent pipeline. We've had multiple champions turn into full-time team members, which has been really valuable. So we believe it's a really good way to utilize our internal resources and do more with less. So I'm gonna pass it off to Paul, who's gonna share how we do this together.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy. It's always awesome to hear from customers. As AWS, we can talk about the things we do, but I really, really like hearing from how customers approach these problems. And I think as we wrap it all up, there's some similarities in the things that AWS and MongoDB have done, and there's some differences, and that's okay. I think that as we consider what we're trying to solve for here, we're trying to solve for distributed security ownership. And there are a couple of different approaches that we've talked about, but there are other ways that you can approach this as well. AWS Guardians program is pretty much well focused on AppSec engineers scaling into the builder community. That's very much accelerating through the security review process. Whereas a lot of the things that Amy talked about were getting security ownership and getting security knowledge across the entire organization. I think the way she described people feeling comfortable to talk to other folks in the same job role because they have the same experiences is a really good first step of, well, can I go and talk to my champion? No, maybe they've got a good answer. Maybe I haven't found the particular piece of guidance. So focusing on what's going to work for your organization and not being afraid to pivot and try something different. But both of the approaches started off with education. What are the things that you need to train up who are not in the security org in order to help them expand that distributed security ownership? We start with threat modeling. There's other approaches. But I thought also keeping the training fresh, keeping the content updated so that you're reacting to the world around you and you're providing the guidance to the existing members of the community and new members of the community so you can empower them to make these good decisions. Because ultimately we're talking about distributed ownership, and security is everyone's job. Everything you do goes towards the overall security posture of an organization. And then once you've got the program running, I talked about how we started off with, is this useful? What are the metrics for getting support? And Amy also talked about getting leadership support and getting supervisor buy-in for people joining the program. Then you kind of move your focus to how is it operating? Are the metrics supporting your ability to understand the growth of the community, the education you provide to the community? Are the feedback loops in the process so that the guardians or the champions or the advocates can get feedback on how they're operating? And using that wider community to provide feedback into your application security or InfoSec teams. And do not underestimate the power of swag, badges, hats, phone tool icons, and things that are exclusive to a community. Communities like to bond together, so if you're in the Guardians community, you can recognize that other folks are in that community as well. And using this distributed signal to help you understand as a security function, where should you focus your energy next? Getting this distributed information from multiple different parts of your business is super helpful. So how can you get started now? How can you embark on a Guardians or Champions program? I think you should think big. Think about scaling it as wide as possible, but it's okay to start small. Some of these types of programs start really well by focusing on a particular team that's already working well with security. If you're focusing on the engineering use cases, maybe automate one thing, automate another thing, and measure how that helps one team move more quickly through the security process. That's a good starting data point to then go and get leadership support to say, this is something that's valuable and it helps our entire organization. We recently updated the well-architected framework with 8 new best practices focusing on application security. And a couple of those reference building a Guardians or Champions program. And once you've got the support and once you've got some data, identify the sponsors. And these sponsors are going to be in the security organization, but potentially in the wider business as well. Amy talked about how the CISO that she works with went to the board and works with the other C-suite to identify, this Champions program is really useful and we're going to continue to support it. So having organizational support for these kind of programs is incredibly valuable. We start our training with threat modeling for builders. There's workshops that have been going on at reInvent already, and it's published on workshops at AWS. So that link will take you to that particular piece of training, and we feel that's a really good way of helping people reason about the security properties of a system. So hope you enjoyed hearing about the 2 different approaches from AWS and MongoDB. I'd like you to take this back to your organizations, go build securely, think about distributed security ownership, and go and empower the people in your organization. Thank you very much.